these past couple of days feel like they have flown by. They've been so stacked with knowledge, with just scholarship, and just some of the most brilliant minds in culinary working today, not just in this country, but in the world. I really hope that just being in this space and how special it is hasn't been lost on you, because it certainly has not been lost on me. This morning when I was thinking about this panel, I kept coming to this quote from Maya Angelou, and it's, "I come as one, but I stand as 10,000." And I feel like that has been the theme of this whole conference. When we talk about the foodways of the African diaspora, we're talking about thousands and thousands of stories. It's a tapestry of so many different cooking techniques and ingredients, and just brilliance on both sides of the Atlantic. When Dr. J poured, Dr. Thérèse, I call her Dr. J, when she poured libation to start this conference off to honor ancestors on both sides of the Atlantic. That's so special. And so this panel here, how do we take all of that knowledge that we've been just steeped in for the past couple of days? How do we take it home to our individual spaces, to our corners of the food world? So how do we do that with intention as well? So when it comes to intentionality, I mean, I can't think of 3 more perfect people to speak with about that. That word has come up just over and over again. And another word that has come up is reclamation. So I actually want to start with you, Chef Thiam. Caught you off guard. And with reclamation, I think about fonio and Yolélé, and how you're bringing these ancestral ingredients into the mainstream, the main market. So I'd love to hear you talk about that, about reclamation.
Thank you, and for starting with me. I think what we're doing with Yolélé, which is looking back and going as far back as possible to find those crops that have been ignored for so long due to different reasons. One being colonialism, another one being, maybe it's not the word I should use. What's the word that you use for that again?
I don't want to say.
Well, yeah, but it's important to be correct, right? But you know what I mean by colonialism, that disruption that happened to our cultures in Africa. And because of that, and modern times, and the food system, the modern food system, has made those crops disappear. And for me, going back and looking for as far back as possible and finding a crop like fonio, which is the oldest cultivated grain in Africa. And fonio, to me, again, I have to insist that fonio is just one of many other crops. Fonio is one of the few thousands left. Some like 90% of our biodiversity has already disappeared. And this is a scary situation that we find ourselves in. So as we go through that journey, for me, going back and finding those crops were a way to not only reconnect with something that my ancestors have mastered, have domesticated, and have brought to us, and bringing it back, figuring a way to create a value chain to make it accessible to the world is one way to pay homage to them, and at the same time, it's a way to really be contributing in saving our planet. So that's really where we have to think of it, you know, the contribution that we all can make by choosing to integrate these crops that have disappeared, that are called orphan crops, underutilized. And a quarter of those plant foods that are edible are actually in Africa at the moment. A quarter of the global plant food is growing in Africa, and they are disappearing at a rapid rate because of the food system that has imposed it upon us. So there's a mission behind it, and that mission is self-serving because it's a way for me to also reconnect with my tradition, with my heritage, with my ancestry.
Chef Rayford, thinking about reclamation in relationship to your work, I think so much of like being on the land that your family has been on since the 1800s is just so beautiful and so moving. I'd love to hear from you. You said during our planning call, you said, I I don't want to think about it in terms of decolonization. I want to think about it in terms of reclamation. So I want to hear from you about how you use that framework when thinking about your work.
Well, I forgot my voice. I got to go into that early morning voice, I guess. You know, when you said, you know, the land's been in my family since the 1800s, and I think when we use the word decolonization, we give colonization power. And when we use the word reclamation, we're talking about taking something back. And oftentimes when people talk about reclamation, they're talking about the kumbaya reclamation. All nice and easy, all cutesy, name your organization. I'm talking about physically being aggressive and taking it back. When I think about reclamation, I think about taking it back and then showing up and showing out like you talked about earlier. We have to do that. Otherwise, the reclamation is way too peaceful. Decolonization, by a show of hands, how many people think it was a peaceful colonization? So why would reclamation be all cute? It don't need to be cute. Sit in the things that have happened and move forward. If you don't want to do that, then understand that reclamation is going to be very hard for you, but not for Matthew. And I'm not willing to let my children's children have to put up with the BS that I've had to put up with. And I say that because I was talking to several of us earlier and was explaining that a lot of people have never experienced open, hard racism. At the age of 10, I was denied the right to use the bathroom in the city that I grew up in. That was 45 years ago. So how do you think I feel when someone uses the word decolonization? No one will reclaim that. Because for a long time, anytime I came across a white woman in a store, I was nervous that she was going to say, "You ain't supposed to be here." Now, what do you do with a 10-year-old child that's now a 55-year-old grown man that has also served 10 years in the military with 3 combat tours? I don't care whether you hurt within reclamation. I know I fought for this country. I know I've done all the right things that people have told me I should do, and now I ain't sitting in it no more. I'm pulling it back, and I'm telling everybody else, look, you see what's underneath the veil, right? Pull it all the way back and pull it all the way in.
Yes. So there's also this just depth of scholarship that's been in our foodways for a long time that hasn't been acknowledged. And Dr. Marisol, when I think about your work, it's just really digging deep into that scholarship. I'd love to hear about the intentionality with which you do that and how you honor African foodways through your work with Greg Cacao and as a food historian and the many things that you do.
Thank you. I came into food through the academic world, having studied anthropology and history. So, you know, I had a rich arsenal of information when I decided to explore Latin American foodways. And it was all in preparation for a big book called Una Cocina Latina, so, which led me onwards on a voyage of exploration that at first became, you know, it was very structured, but it became a very personal journey. And how could you not, when you are traveling throughout Latin America, how could you not find Africa? So everywhere I went, especially in tropical America, I found myself. I found my experience of someone who makes genetic makeup and very rich cultural background, rooted on 3 distinct peoples, you know, who made Cuba. I found myself through Africa in so many places, and it was unavoidable. I researched, you know, that African influence in Latin America with intent and purpose, because it was my way of understanding all the things. It was my handle, understanding myself through that experience. I was able to really unravel cuisines and find continuities, find the many ways in which we are one in Latin America. So I brought that back, not only to my writing, my books on Latin American cooking, Gran Cocina Latina, my most recent book on peppers for the Americas, and my work on cacao and chocolate. And I brought that also to my menus. So I honor the recipes that I got from primary sources, because having been trained in anthropology, and also when you are also a historian, you understand the importance of primary sources. And a primary source is not only a document that you find in an archive or a library, but it's the person who shares the recipe. So that person came back with me, and that person is given credit in my recipes. Their stories are in my books, but also their stories are on the menus that I created for my restaurants, Mama and Safra, where I named people, I gave credit, I told stories. And what happens when you are in the food world, as you know, you talk. You get invited to conferences. And for me, the gateway was actually Worlds of Flavors, and it was working with Greg Fresher in other endeavors in a past life. So I was able to share that experience and share the names of those people, those images, you know, when you present your PowerPoint, and you understand who these people were, you know where they come from. So for me, that has been very important. But in this present life, I had to close my restaurants, unfortunately, during the pandemic, which I'm still mourning. But I think of my restaurants, which did very well, and they were very important in New Jersey, as chapters in my life that allow me to tell that story, especially of those, you know, African cooks that are part of our culinary language. When I closed the restaurants, I looked back at a company that I had created before my restaurants. It was called Gran Cacao, which I structured basically to sell heirloom cacao from small farms throughout Latin America. But it so happened that most of that cacao came from communities that were filled with Black descendants. It was either the small farmers that I met, or it was the laborers, because you have to understand, you know, people don't get the idea that, that a farmer can be many things. So I got their story. So in a way, by teaching them how to market their beans internationally, because that's one of the things I used to do, I, you know, would buy beans, but I would have to get markets for those small farmers. So I have to get the story right. I have to understand everything about their lives, about the terroir, about the history of the cacao. So I got to do ethnography. So I was really documenting, you know, a chapter in the African diaspora through the lens of cacao. And this is, you know, what I'm doing right now, but actually, I'm using everything that I know from cooking at a restaurant, creating a restaurant menus, plus my academic background and that knowledge of ethnography, to a project that I'm doing under the umbrella of Gran Cacao Company, which is in Costa Rica. So it's an agroecological and gastro-botanical center. It's near San Jose, but what we're doing is exploring all the cacao growing areas in Costa Rica and bringing that experience to the center. And we started with the Afro-Caribbean region. And what we learned was unbelievable, because, you know, we went deep and started working with small farmers. And what I noticed, and the botanists that are working with me were fascinated, because more than in other regions, there is more harmony in terms of cacao living with other useful plants. Edible, you know, plants of all kinds, plus medicinal herbs. This medicinal knowledge, the understanding of botany of these small Black farmers is unbelievable. So what we're doing is transferring that knowledge to our center near San Jose, but the question of credit is important because in a way we're doing a clonal cacao garden, but we're using the models that we learned, but we're bringing those cacao farmers with us. So we have a series of workshops and conferences, and they're gonna be really involved. And another thing that I have to say, that when I go to a cacao farm and I see women, I want to add value to the cacao these people grow. Women are quite involved in cacao growing. And many of them already have small businesses as small chocolate makers. So everywhere I've gone, I have tried to help these women create cooperatives, learn artisanal chocolate making techniques so that they can add value. Because I believe that all cacao producing countries should have an artisanal chocolate industry. And this is very important for Africa too. They have to do that consistently. But this is something I'm doing in the Americas.
I think you use so many fantastic words, but let's focus on credit and names. I think when you were talking about your menu and how you put names on there, names of farmers, and that's so much of, I get frustrated when I see media kind of treat Black Foodways as trends, or, have you heard of black eyed peas? Here's things you can make with it. 7 black eyed pea recipes.
It's key, and if you read any of my books, the story before you get into the nitty-gritty of how you make that dish is who gave the recipe, and about because first of all, why would I not do that? I mean, it would be so boring. I mean, what kind of a recipe is this, with just instructions on how to saute something? I mean, it's ridiculous. So you need to have a head note that matters. And you need to tell the story of these cooks everywhere. I mean, anthropologists know that. There is an anthropologist there who's nodding her head. And Jessica, who does that too. This is the beauty of this. So if you don't do it, you're being ridiculous and unfair, and this appropriation business is just stupid. Because, I mean, what is there? Why not give credit? I don't understand it. For me, credit is unique. When I make fonio, let me tell you this, I make fonio all the time. This guy conquered my heart with fonio. So I tell his story. I have his books. I show it. This is where I learn it. His story now is a part of the story of my kitchen.
That's beautiful. I actually wanted to ask you, Chef Thiam, about how you bring that intentionality to your work as a chef, and any advice you have for other culinary leaders in the space right now about how they can bring that intentionality when they're working with the cuisines of the African diaspora.
Well, for me, it was, it's really, I can't take the credits, and like you said, the credits to keep looking for where it's coming from. And this is what I wanted to share with my audiences, my readers. And it really came to me organically. I mean, you and Matt, you had the opportunity, it's through your education, and Matt, because you're a farmer. But for me, I really followed this path and just learned as I'm sharing with my audience. I was also learning. My second cookbook, I wanted it to be a continuation of the first cookbook. The first one was about the food that inspired me. The second one, I wanted the readers to know where that food coming from, who's behind the crops, the ingredients that I'm using. So I decided to go and travel and meet the farmers and introducing the farmers to the audience. As a matter of fact, Jessica did the beautiful introduction to that book, and that really gave a nice little addition to it. But that really was about the farmers. It really was not how, unfortunately, oftentimes as chefs, we think of cookbooks and it's really about the finished plates, beautiful plates, the colorings. But behind these plates, we forget that we are historians, really. We are storytellers, especially when you start digging deeper and you start following the ingredients. And I'm here in the southeastern region of Senegal, the most remote part of Senegal, and I discovered this grain, and I'm sharing it with my audience. And as I'm sharing it with my audience, I'm trying to think even further. Like, these people are among the poorest ones in Senegal. how can we contribute? They have this amazing product that I know the rest of the world would benefit from. How could we figure out a value chain so that this can be a way for them to have a source of income? It turns out even as they're having a source of income from this amazing product, there's also the environment is benefiting from it because it's a drought-resistant crop. It's a crop that is on the verge of disappearing unless we figure out a market for it. So we're saving biodiversity as we do that. It turns out it's a crop that also grows in a regenerative way, which Matthew is already practicing in his farm. But this is a practice that's been done in African farming regions for generations. So that's the storytelling that continues because you're also telling the story of these crops, how they've been domesticated. You can go back as far as possible, 5,000 years, even further. This crop was found in ancient Egyptian pyramids, so it's like it takes you even further. So again, you know, you can keep going. Every plate that you see, every dish that we prepare as chefs, that dish is really telling you a story. Each of those ingredients, there was a way that made them get to your plate, beside the moment where us chefs, we decide to transform it from raw to cooked. Before that, the farmers, they got it from a tradition that was passed upon them from their parents. The fishermen, same thing too. There's always a tradition that comes back, and that's that story that we are telling. And that story can be beautiful, conquest. It can also be ugly. When you look at certain stories, certain ingredients, and you look at how Hopping Jones has arrived here, that's one example of feijoada. That story is also telling the story of the Middle Passage. So that's another way of us, through our craft, telling the story. So we are storytellers, griots, more so even custodians of this beautiful cuisine tradition that has been passed upon us, and it's our responsibility to also pass it to the next generation. We have different tools. Back in the days, that was mother to daughter in an oral way. Now we have access to books, we can write it down, we can take those. But this is a responsibility that I'm not taking lightly, and I know we are here because we are not taking it lightly. We know that this is it behooves us to pass it on. It is something that is amazing, that this cuisine has survived the hardships of the Middle Passage and come out here in so many different ways and beautifully, creatively. Just, what's the word? When you come out of your ashes, it's like the phoenix, yes. And you mentioned Maya Angelou. I was thinking, I mean, still we rise. I mean, this is really that poem that I'm seeing through this beautiful conference, and how this cuisine that came out from the shores of the Atlantic, and wherever you go in the diaspora, you will see it really reinterpreted. The essence is here, but the creativity, because of the environment being different in many ways, we were able to just take it and transform it. And we have to credit so many people, the ancestors first, the farmers second, and realizing that by integrating this cuisine, it's a win-win-win. We are winning to the consumers here, the consumers around the world. We are winning because we are having a diet that's diversified. That means a healthier diet. We are winning because our environment is being, the climate change is really because of monoculture. And if we support small farmers, we are supporting a rotational type of agriculture. We're supporting agroforestry. So the environment is winning. And the small farmers are winning because they also have a source of income. So it's win, win, win. And this is really what this whole thing is about.
Yes, it's custodian is such a perfect way to put that, because there's a responsibility that comes with being a custodian. You can't be frivolous with it. You have to be very thoughtful and intentional. Chef Rayford, when I think about your cookbook, I think an underlying message of it is just this passionate advocacy for small Black farmers. And so I'd love to hear from you about how culinary leaders in this room can think about working with small Black farms.
Well, let me start off by saying I have a couple of questions that I'm gonna ask the audience. I don't want anybody to scream anything out, but I would like for everybody to just take a moment and think about why you came to this conference. Just a moment. I want you to think about it. I want you to sit in it. Also, if you thought you were going to come here and extrapolate from these people of African descent, take it back to your spot and make it the same. It's not going to happen. It's not going to taste that way. So if that was your thought, here let me give you a better thought. You should be ensuring that you are talking to every single presenter, every single chef, and now you only got a little bit of time to do it. If you ain't done it already, ain't being the operative word. You need to do that. You need to ensure that you put your money where your mouth is. If you came and paid for your ticket to come here, there was a reason. You should be bringing these chefs back to your places and having them teach your staff, not you going, oh, I got all this, I saw all that. Yeah, I like that. We're going to do all of that. And then you come out years later, yeah, we tried that. It didn't work. Yeah, it's not going to work because you don't have the subject matter experts doing it. It's the exact same thing in farming. The reason that the small farmer, especially small black farmer in the United States, has always been kind of small was because we were trying our best to take care of the community. We weren't trying to feed the world. That's what we done got it wrong so many times in America, and we still keep getting stuck in it. We are not trying to feed the world. We're trying to take care of our communities, as in keep the money in the community so we have economics that are helping that community. Small farmers feed people that are in their community. Trying to consistently feed the world had us starve out Africa and then send them rice. I said this in my demo before. In the 70s, I remember being a child watching TV and them dropping thousands and thousands of pallets of rice in Africa from a famine that they created. So how are you gonna give back rice to somebody that gave you rice? It's the worst thing. So we have to ensure that we don't let that ever happen again, and understand, regardless also of color, those small farmers are just trying to take care of their families and their community. By you purchasing from them, by you going back to them, telling them, do you know that I have 50 acres of land, and rarely does someone come and say, you know, you got 50 acres of land and my business goes through 2,000 pounds of something. I'll buy it all from you if you're willing to grow it. They never come to black farmers and say that. So those great stories that you see in places like, I don't know, all the magazines, I don't want to start naming all because I don't want anybody to be offended or be sitting out there going, ooh, he said something about, I don't want that. But I want you to understand, when you see those farming pictures and see all those great opportunities that you see, how many of them look like me, walk like me, and talk like me that you can say that you saw in a book or a magazine? You don't, because they never come to us, right? You brought us here to farm. You brought us here to be engineers. You brought us here to do all this work, and now you're going to say that we're less than, not educated, can't read or write. We don't need to. We taught you. We don't need all those languages. We had all these languages. 52 countries with 500 languages. Come on now. What are we doing? So we have to think about it like that. Like, how do we regenerate? Oh, I'm glad you brought the word regenerative. Regenerative agriculture, or regenerative organic agriculture, means that to regenerate something has to be there in the first place. Am I correct? Something already has to be in place for something to be regenerated. So that means we co-opted another word. First of all, you gave me organic, and try to get black farmers to buy into this organic certification, blah, blah, blah. If you're not organically certified, you can't work with various companies like Whole Foods and things like that. That's a gateway to keep us out. We gonna pay to be certified for something that you only go buy a few pieces from? Is that economically viable for a small farmer? How many people are gonna go like this? It's not. And especially if you're a black farmer, which has already had a problem and is problematic with the USDA. So it ends up becoming a vicious cycle. But if you really look at regenerative agriculture or organic agriculture, you're talking about African agriculture. You're talking about African ways to plant, African ways to compost. I'll give y'all a perfect co-opting example. Has anyone here heard of permaculture? Yeah, a lot of you have. Well, there's something in permaculture that they call the keyhole method for composting. And it's where you take an area, like a raised bed area, and you create kind of a circular piece in there, and you put all your scraps in. And then you throw little worms in there. Or not. You don't have to, because nature will attract its own thing in there. It's originally called the African tower. But in permaculture, and if anybody knows, you pay a lot of money to become a permaculture certified, but you're using methods that are the old ways that come out of Africa. That's extrapolation again. We got a quick change in the names. It is what it is. Say where it came from. We're talking about being storytellers here. We're talking about the next generation. As a matter of fact, show of hands, how many of y'all got kids? Look at there. How many of your kids are going to be listening to this same conversation when they become adults? Do you want them to sit in the same conversation when they become adults? Then change. You can't keep doing the exact same thing and expect it to change, because your children are going to mess around and meet my children. So you see me sitting here, right? 215 pounds, grown man. My youngest boy is 6'5", 250, 18. And that's him natural. Imagine your child having to sit in that audience with my child sitting here doing the exact same thing. Have we done anything correct if that happens? We have not. Just sit in it.
I love when you get on, I love when you start talking, and you started this by saying, you know, my morning voice, and then you just, that morning voice was gone, and I love it. But you said so many incredible things as usual. But I think, you know, just that responsibility, just being super intentional with your choices as a chef and where you're sourcing from and the stories you're telling. But I also want to hear from you, Dr. Marisol, about continuing education as a chef. How do you make sure you're still learning, still pushing things forward as you're working in kitchens?
I'm extremely curious, so I mean, I will continue learning until the day I die. But the thing is that by teaching, I'm also learning. So, you know, through cacao, you know, we have an institute called the International Institute of Chocolate and Cacao Tasting. We have about 2,000 students all over the world. And so we go to these communities and do courses. And, you know, this course, you know, about the history of cacao that has to do, is a prism to see other things, like the history of the diaspora. You know, gives me the opportunity, you know, to tell a story that a lot of people don't understand. Right now, for example, in the work I'm doing in Costa Rica, people have no idea of how Africans made it to the country. They have ideas that they were brought in for plantations, and Africans came to Costa Rica through different ways. And in fact, you know, if you go to Matina, you realize that the Africans who work in the cacao plantations became shortly, you know, tenant farmers, and they became independent small farmers very quickly. The Africans around the Caribbean coast came from other places, and many of them were very educated people, and it's a more recent phenomenon. It's almost like a 20th century phenomenon. So, and they became independent small farmers. And people don't understand either that there are enclaves of African culture and continuities in the Americas that were marginal to slavery. You know, there were communities, there were maroon societies, for example, the Garifuna, that are also farming communities along the Caribbean coast. If you go to Esmeraldas in Ecuador, the northern part, It was almost like an independent kingdom. They had to be recognized by the colonial authorities in Quito. You go to Cartagena, and there is San Basilio de Palenque, where there's incredible community of women chefs, and they were free. It was a maroon society, a community. So you have to understand that there are important chapters in the history of the diaspora that do not fit, that preconceived idea that everybody went to work in a sugarcane plantation. There are no small farmers with sugarcane, but there are small farmers that grow cacao and other crops. So these are things that I care about, that I communicate while I'm teaching, and obviously because I am always on the, boots on the ground, I'm doing research, and I am kind of building this database, ethnographic, historical, anthropological, that I intend to put in writing, working on a 3rd edition of my cacao book, which, is going to have all these different stories, from the farming communities that I'm getting to know.
That's amazing. And I loved how you said teaching helps you learn as well.
Absolutely. I mean, don't you do that when you teach, when you have to, actually, when you're preparing for a conference like this, don't you sit down and write and read and
well, I think restaurants are
schools. They're great opportunities, especially nowadays when chefs are expected to be speakers and to host events. It's a constant, educational endeavor.
Yeah, and pre-meal, like how many of us have sat through a pre-meal where we talk about the history of a particular wine or a particular vineyard, but we're not going into Black Foodways. Like, there's so many opportunities for restaurants to be places where people...
Intentionality, and if it's something that we care about, then we go ahead and do it. And also what I advise is to find a focus and to find things that you're passionate about. I have found it. It's through cacao, for example, but also I'm very interested in places where African foodways were able to survive. For example, religious activities, or the Santeria and Candomblé complex, Carnival, for example, Saints' Days. I focus on that because you find the kernels of African foodways kept alive. So you focus on these things. There are a number of other things that I care about, but I have already identified them, because I believe that as custodians, it's a great word, custodians of these traditions, we owe it not only to the descendants, those Africans brought in as slaves, the 10.5 million who survived the Middle Passage, the 1 million that came to my country, for example, but we owe it to Africa, because you know what I believe? That we are the past and the future of Africa. We hold the keys of so many things that were lost in Africa through colonialism, and we kept them in those niches of resistance and influence that we created in the Americas. So this is something that we need to understand. In a way, I'm an Afrofuturist, I can imagine a world without slavery, and I can imagine, go to the Metropolitan Museum and there is an Afrofuturist room there, and understand, we can fly.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I love that. Chef Thiam, what does the future look like for you when you're thinking about the African diaspora and Black foodways around the world?
Well, maybe echoing what Maricel just beautifully said, is the future is the past, really, especially when it comes to the food system. Sometimes we think, in our ego, we think that we are coming up with new things, and we're not. We really are not. But if we intentionally and consciously realize that we are not, and even further, if we, in this context, I tend to always come back to the context where the planet is at right now. We're talking about climate change, we're talking about issues that are, really existential even. And in a context like this, we have a saying in Senegal, it's a word of saying that translates, when you are lost, return to where you came from. And this is where we are here with the food system. We are lost. We know that the food system that we have is not sustainable, and this is going to be a challenge for a planet that's going to be about 10 billion in a few years, 2 billion of them in Africa, and we haven't figured out how to feed 10 billion people. And the solution is really already here. That solution was given to us by our ancestors, and by tracing back, by going back into the way we were feeding ourselves with respect to the environment, respect to the tradition, respect to the small farmers, those artisans that were at the beginning of the food, respect to the ingredient, and realizing that those ingredients are not just commodities that have to be on our supermarket shelves year-round. There is a season for each ingredient. By respecting that, by respecting the rotation, then there is a future possible. Otherwise, there is no future. So that's why I mean the future is the past. So we have to keep that into perspective.
Chef Rayford, how do you think about the future of Black Foodways?
I think the future is based upon seed saving. Everything starts with a seed. And today we've planted, this week we've planted some amazing seeds. As this thing continues to grow and bloom, we got to save all those little pieces so that as we continue to grow and we decide to plant those next crops or have the next conversation, as in when you go home and have that conversation with your children about this amazing conference that you had, that you are planting a new seed. And the more we do that, eventually that seed will become drought resistant. That seed will become a way for us to step and craft the future. Because right now, if we don't, in this room, do what we know we need to do, as in saving the seed, the knowledge that you're taking in right now, going back and protecting the area that you're in and planting those seeds of knowledge, so that we can craft a new future. It's all going to start with seeds. It's also going to start with us stop going to conferences and not staying in touch with each other. I am the worst at that. I will tell you why. JJ and I met at CIA, and the first time that we've ever cooked again has been 16 years later. We have to start staying in touch with each other, grooming each other, mentoring each other, talking about what's happening in our areas. I need to know what's happening. You know, I need to understand more about cacao. I need to understand more about your brilliance. I need to understand more about everybody that's here. And the more we keep doing that, that's that planting of that new seed. That's our future.
We're out of time, but I just want to thank you so much, each of you, and thank everyone for being here with us. This conference has been just absolutely wonderful to be steeped in this. Thank you, Dr. Harris. Thérèse, I don't know where the camera is, but hi, miss you. And thank you for your brilliance as well, putting all of this together. This has been incredible. So thank you, everybody.
So I also, hello? Am I on? Okay, there we go. You always do that, right? You're like, hello, hello, and then it's like, ah. So I just also want to thank Korsha for her wonderful moderation. Just so good at keeping the conversation flowing and knowing when to ask some really interesting and pertinent questions. So thank you, Korsha. Thank you to the panelists. And so we're ending our conference. We will go on to our marketplace, talk about that in a minute. But I have some slides here. Let's do this. So I just want to thank so many of you who stopped me in the hallways and stopped my colleagues in the hallways to say how much you've enjoyed this conference. As I mentioned before, our team, our operations team, our programming team, and the team in this building thinks about your experience, every single detail. So we love feedback. We look at feedback and we'll use it to, improve our conference next year. And we would just love to capture your impressions of this event. And so we've got this link that you can use. We also, on your app, the first page that comes up, if you scroll down, you'll see the form there. You can click on that. And then we also send an email that apparently they're going to send today, because that's how on top of things we are. And so that'll have a link to, as well as more information. Matthew and Pierre will be signing books at the marketplace, and I'm going to pass it off now to. I'm so sorry. So all three of our panelists will be signing books, and so continue the conversations there. And now I'm going to introduce my colleague, Rupa Bhattacharya, and then we will have some closing remarks from Dr. Harris.
Y'all, this has been. No, I mean, I don't know how I follow that. I don't know how anyone follows that. That was beautiful. That was stunning. The last 2 days of the last couple general sessions have been, in many ways, the organizing principles around which we organize this entire thing, right? We wanted to talk about extraction. We wanted to talk about next steps. We want to talk about the future. We want to talk about how I don't want my kid to have this conversation anymore. So hopefully, if your son, mine's 10, so we can talk. We can get some mentorship going. He's 5'0", so But this has just been an exhilarating couple days. This has been some of the most incredible experiences of my career. And I'm still just processing the sheer excellence of everything we've seen on stage in breakouts for the last 3 days. I just feel so fortunate to have been able to have been part of it. One of the things that's just been so remarkable about all of this is that this isn't an individual effort. This is one of the things that when I came in for this team, it was one of these things where it's like, the amount of people who were involved in making all of this happen, I want to be really clear that this wasn't any one individual. This was just a work of multitudes and multitudes and multitudes standing up on the shoulders of multitudes. So like all of you have heard, Therese Nelson, once again, just a simply tireless force of nature in bringing folks to the table this week and making sure our presenters all had a chance to, and y'all know what I'm about to say, but show up and show out, right? Like, we wanted people to show up on stage and be their absolute best selves, right? It was critically important to all of us, me, the CIA team, everyone who organized this, that the presenters feel not like they were putting on a performance, not like they had to show up and dance, and not that they had to show up and perform. They could show up and be their true selves. They could show up, they could be in community. In a way that's expansive and inclusive and allows the audience to tap in, and every single one of y'all brought it and delivered an experience that I don't think any of us are going to forget anytime soon. So I got to thank all of them. I've got to thank the committee, and I've got to thank you, the audience, for showing up and for being in community with us and for granting us all the grace to be our true selves with you. So thank you to the advisory committee led by the phenomenal Dr. Harris, you'll hear from after me. Thank you so much to the entire Strategic Initiatives team, Program Director Jennifer Breckner, Operations Queen Christina Adamson, the entire ops team, Shara Oram, and the sponsorship team who played the world's most complicated game of Tetris to get everything in the right place and everybody, everything they needed. Chef Tony and the culinary team for the best food I've personally ever had at a conference. Don't tell the other conferences, it's cool. Copia lead Tom Bensel, Greg Drescher, who founded this conference and this team and led it so capably for so many years. Sue Custon and CIA leadership for giving us the keys. And every single CIA team member who put months and months and months of work into making sure everyone's experience here was seamless. Thank you to the sponsors, without whom none of this could have happened. And one more time, thank you to all of you for having come and taken time away from your lives and your businesses to join us here. This is my first year here. This is my first Worlds of Flavor. So as we involve the Strategic Initiatives Group and the kind of content and events we're putting out in the world, we really do want your feedback. So please hit that form. We listen, we pay attention, we read everything. Tell us what you'd like to see more of. Tell your friends and colleagues you think might enjoy your programming and have them get on our email lists. If you loved it here, tell 3 friends. If you hated it, come see me privately. Parking lots, chill, whatever. We're about to launch also, just a heads up, some hands-on post-conference events. So starting next summer, so small group, hands-on cooking. So if you learned a bunch of things that you'd like to get some experience cooking, you can come through here and do that. So get on our email list to know when those things drop. I think it'll be, Q2 of next year, but I'll keep you posted. I think that's everything I have. I think I might even have slides that I forgot to tell because I was so high on adrenaline. Save the dates, new events. I'm totally speeding through it all. But I hope to see you all here very soon at many of our future events. And at the absolute latest, we'd like to see you here next year, where we're going to dig deep into a lot of the questions. Today in my breakout, we talked about authenticity, and we talked about what's real, and we talked about what happens when you replace certain leaves with spinach, because that's what you can get here, and whose experience gets to be authentic, right? So in the worst case scenario, I'll see you next year. I'm hoping I'll see you up at the marketplace. We've got a dope DJ who will be playing us out with one last round of food and book signings from all of these folks. And I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Harris. And thank you so much all for joining us.
Good afternoon, and I think it is afternoon. I am going to be incredibly brief. First of all, thank you to you all for coming. Thank you, Rupa, Jennifer, everybody. I'm going to forget people, so I always say, even in the introductions to my book, to that person whose name I've forgotten, forgive me. This has been extraordinary. As I said, only really 2 days ago, I had been like an earworm in Greg Drescher's ear for at least 2 decades, trying to get this to happen. So now that it has happened, I'm going to leave you with 3 thoughts. First of all, Thérèse, you are amazing. I'm going to teach you how to get on a train. Enough said. Thank you. Secondly, maybe we should think about agriculture and not agribusiness. Just think about that. I have spent most of my culinary life being an irritant, and so I'm going to end with that and one last thing. I think this conference has been a benchmark that I don't know that we even understand how important it is. It is of unbelievable importance to the presenters to be in community. Oh, somebody's trying to kill me already. To be in community with each other. Some of us only know each other from social media, and it's the first time we've been in the room. Paraphrase Hamilton, in the room where it happens. So I would like to continue my career as an irritant and posit, Rupa, come out here for a minute. Gonna make you crazy. She's gone. She's over here, hey. I think we should have some more of these African conferences, specifically African related. So, yeah. So maybe there is another tangent from World of Flavors that becomes World of African Flavors and its diaspora. And then finally, the most intelligent thing I ever heard about marriage, and I have never been married, so it was revelatory to me, is a young man said at his parents' 25th wedding anniversary, I understand marriage now. It's not about the commitment. It's about the commitment to the commitment. So I leave you with those words in terms of this conference. It's not about the commitment. It's about your commitment to the commitment. Thank you very much.
And we'll see you all in the marketplace upstairs, I think right now. This is, oh my God. Oh my God, yeah, wow.
I have something to say.
Yes.
I am Doris Carrera.
Pleasure to meet you.
I am a professor. So I have some books I went to the library.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, I appreciate it. Thank you.
We'll talk to you later.
Please.
From Kingston, Jamaica, the largest English-speaking city south of Miami, where cool reggae rhythms provide the background music for diners feasting on fiery hot jerk chicken, to San Juan's elegant dining rooms, where the clientele is as sophisticated as any in the world, to Tobago's beachside food stalls that offer treats that play on the sea's rich bounty. The Caribbean islands of Jamaica, Puerto Rico, and Trinidad and Tobago offer a complex world of flavors where fine dining can be found side by side with a staggering array of street eats and finger-licking beach treats. Visit a region that is as familiar as fried chicken and as exotic as breadfruit and jackfruit. As we shop in markets that seem transported from the African continent, sample traditional dishes that were eaten in the region before the arrival of Columbus, and visit fine dining restaurants that equal any in the world. We'll stop in the kitchens of Chef Willow Bennett, a graduate of the Culinary Institute of America, who is transforming the traditional dishes of his native island into a nueva cocina puertorriqueña, a new Puerto Rican cuisine where past traditions inform modernist masterpieces. We'll watch as Chef Khalid Mohammed of Chaude Restaurant in Trinidad gives us a taste of two Trinidadian classics, and see a new generation of chefs improvising on the hearty foods of Jamaica. Hi, I'm Jessica Harris. I'm a culinary historian and a cookbook author, and for the past 40 years I've been traveling to the Caribbean region looking at food and culture. Most travelers never venture beyond the tourist enclaves, but I've made friends who will be our guides. So join us on this culinary voyage through the Caribbean, where we'll see the countries and the cuisines beyond the beaches. We'll investigate the region's core recipes, demystifying the classics, learning as pitmasters prepare a jerk rub of fiery Scotch bonnet chilies. We'll see land crab empanadillas prepared on a griddle made from tin sheeting and discover a whole repertoire of sweets and candies. We'll even learn a bit about rum, the drink that is one of the region's major exports. We'll meet local chefs, jerk pitmasters, and some of the island's best cooks. We'll visit vibrant tropical markets, learn the Caribbean market basket, and see how each island adds its own ingredients and gives them its own unique flavor. We'll sample flavorful soups from roadside stands and savor beach treats like Puerto Rico's alcapurrias and Trinidad's bacon shark, and delight in the true tastes of the Caribbean. Savoring the best of world flavors, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, Trinidad and Tobago, is the 7th edition of the Culinary Institute of America's World Culinary Arts DVD series, a first-of-its-kind DVD reference library documenting the gold standard of world cuisine. In this volume, we'll explore markets, food stalls, roadside stands, and restaurants, and watch as their leading food authorities, chefs, and local experts discuss ingredients, present classic dishes, and demonstrate culinary techniques in step-by-step detail. Each region has signature dishes that bring a nostalgic smile to the faces of the island's locals and present the best flavors of their culture on a plate. Joining us on our journey is Steve Gilliba, certified master chef and corporate executive chef of Unilever Food Solutions. Steve knows a bit about the Caribbean, but he really discovers its true tastes as we travel to the region. American diners are increasingly adventurous, and many have now nibbled their way around the world. Today's restaurant customers are fascinated by bold, exotic flavors that build on techniques offering innovative twists on the traditional. Through this revolutionary series, the Culinary Institute of America seeks to document and preserve traditional foodways, offering chefs new inspiration and insights into authentic world flavors. More than one food writer has accused Caribbean cuisine of being repetitious regardless of country. How wrong they are. The main ingredients, root vegetables, leafy greens, fish and fowl, do indeed turn up on most of the tables in the region, but each island nation has its own unique flavor profile. The flat-leaf cilantro-like herb known as culantro goes into the Puerto Rican sofrito, and also turns up in Trinidad's green seasoning. But while one is used in dishes that bring the mild taste of Spain to the table, the other accentuates the vivid flavors of India and Africa in Trinidadian dishes, and is even drizzled on the Trinidadian beach specialty bake and shark. We'll prepare both of them and sample myriad local hot sauces and condiments. We'll taste the cassava bread of the Arawak that Columbus wrote about in his journals, and we'll sample true Jamaican jerk as it was originally developed in the Blue Mountains by freed slaves known as the Maroons. Journey with us as we investigate the local island markets, discovering the vast array of tropical fruits and vegetables that go into the pots. Taste hearty stews, substantial side dishes, and flavorful fish. And savor the true tastes of the Caribbean islands of Puerto Rico, Jamaica, and Trinidad and Tobago. There are goats gamboling in the grasses along the side of the road as we make our way north, reminding us that curry goat is a Jamaican tradition. Some Jamaicans argue that a party is not a real party unless there's curry goat. We sample it at Belfield Great House, an 18th century plantation that offers a trip into Jamaica's past. General manager and native Jamaican Michelle Rousseau's culinary background allows her to present the Jamaican classics like curry goat with new twists.
So we cooked the goat outside on a coal pot stove, and when we're finishing it, after we've cooked it in that traditional fashion, we add some coconut milk, which would not traditionally be used in the way that Jamaicans would prepare curry goat. We season it with a bit of ginger to bring in some of that East Indian influence as well, and then we put fresh mango and some white rum in there. And for presentation purposes, we serve it with a coconut rice pilaf, but we also serve some curried chickpeas, and then the whole slew of fresh chutneys and salsas and relishes and garnishes that really are more present in Caribbean cuisine in places like Trinidad, but would not traditionally be eaten here. So we did a really nice papaya salsa and a fresh banana and mango chutney and pickled onions and some cucumber and in yogurt, and really a variety of things. So we believe that you should be able to create the flavor of your own dish. So what we're going to do is really demonstrate for you today a traditional dish of Jamaican curry goat. It's considered the second most popular national dish. I would say after ackee and saltfish, it's probably the most consumed dish locally. And it is the perfect example of fusion cuisine from the 1800s, because goats were existing in Jamaica very early on, but were prohibited from the plantations, and slaves were not allowed to own goats, although they could own sheep and cows and pigs and other animals, and they were consumed mostly by the immigration of
after the immigration of indentured laborers from India who consumed a lot of mutton in India, and so they brought with them the technique of curry, and the two merged, and it's now become a very classic dish in Jamaica today. It's something that we use for a lot of festive occasions at wakes, or what they call 9 nights, but also at the end of a construction site or in any big celebration. They will kill a goat and have what you call a goat feed, and make a coal pot curry goat, which is what we're going to demonstrate today, as well as manish water, which is a soup that takes the innards of the goat and all of the intestines and makes a very hearty, tasty soup with pumpkin and seasonings and spices and typical Caribbean flavors. So we'll do a traditional version, and then we'll show you ways to modernize the dish as well. So here we have some local mutton or goat, what they used to call kid mutton back in the day. So we are going to marinate that, typically with some salt, pepper, a little bit of garlic, thyme, and some curry powder. And you know, cooking in Jamaica is like a process that is an ongoing, long process. We actually start the process of cooking a couple of days before we intend to cook the dish, unless you're cooking a fresh slaughtered piece of meat, which we don't do. So we would marinate it and have it sit for a while. A little bit more curry to that. No, I'm not actually going to use a Scotch bonnet to marinate the goat, because I'm going to add it to the dish itself while I'm cooking. So that would sit for at least 3 or so hours, and then now we have a nice Dutch pot over here on a cold flame. So I'm adding a little bit of coconut oil. We're going to add the goat meat, which we're going to brown slightly. It really is a sort of a stew, but when I like to do it, I like to sear the meat first because it brings out the flavor a bit more. And to that, we shall add some diced onion, a little bit of diced garlic. I like to add ginger, although traditionally they don't, so I'll add a little ginger to that. Scotch bonnet. Now, depending on how hot you like it, you can play with that quantity. Thyme is a must. 4 basic seasonings in Jamaican cooking that must be in everything: scallion, thyme, tomato, Scotch bonnet pepper. Our version of a mirepoix, I guess. The difficult thing about a coal fire is that you can't control the heat, but the good thing is it gets really nice and hot. So then to that now I'm going to add a little bit of more curry powder, which I'll allow to cook a bit, and some scallion. So you can already kind of smell it coming together, but it's really quite, it's a dish that, you know, when you had a whole goat would sit and stew from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. they say, and then it would be served no earlier than 1:30 after we had, the people had been able to consume a minimum of 4 glasses of rum. So they were well hungry, as it says in one of an old recipe that I found for curry goat, and they were, I think, well tipsy is what I would say after 4 glasses of rum on an empty stomach. So add a little salt and pepper there, and then to that, to thicken it, we use some potato. Traditionally, you would have used maybe, you know, cocoa, or you can use any sort of ground provision, but we're using Irish potato. So when we add water to this now and it cooks down, that helps to thicken the stew. And then some carrots. Really very simple. All of the flavor comes in the cooking process. So we'll add a little bit of water to that just to cover. Bring that to a boil, and then let it simmer for a good number of hours, at least 2 hours to 3 hours, so the meat gets nice and tender. So this is what we have after we've simmered the goat for about 2 hours. And this is absolutely perfect to serve as it is. You can just adjust the seasoning with salt and pepper. But if you want to make it into more of like a modern nouvelle type flavored dish, we add a little bit of white rum, just a touch, because a lot of it will evaporate anyway. And we add a little bit of coconut milk powder, because traditionally it would not be cooked with coconut milk, but it really just gives the sauce some depth of flavor. And I like to add some fresh diced mango and let that stew down for maybe another 45 minutes. It lightens the color of the goat a bit, but it really gives it a a slight sweetness to the dish that traditionally is not how it would be eaten. So this is a breadfruit which came off of our tree right here on the estate, and it came to Jamaica with Captain Blythe from Tahiti. It looks like this green, but it has a sort of meaty, soft fruit center that we roast on an open flame, and it gets really charged and lovely, and then you have this texture which is like the texture of bread, thus I think the name breadfruit. But we would serve this typically with a little bit of butter, fresh, hot roasted from the fire. If you have old breadfruit, you can fry it, and it can make great breadfruit chips, and it's really nice on the side of a little bit of curry, so as it sops up that gravy in a most delicious way. Let's serve up this curry goat now, because we have this lovely breadfruit to sop up all of the delicious gravy with the coconut milk and the mango and the Local goat can be a bit bony, so you have to mind the bones when you eat, but it's worth every bite. So here you go, Jamaican curry goat with roasted breadfruit, done on a coal pot fire right here at Belfield Great House.
Trinidad street food abounds with Indian names like Sahina, Aloo Pie, and Baghani. Trinis, as Trinidadians call themselves, are born nibblers. Eating on the street is a way of life, and at times it seems as though everyone is munching away on a snack, sipping from a coconut, or lined up awaiting the next tidbit. Visiting a local stand, Deborah treats Steve to a range of Trinidadian street food.
All right, so Steve, here we have a Sahina, which is basically the callaloo that was basically flattened, and in between there we have the split peas as a fritter. And what we've done is we've opened it up and filled it with a little bit of mango, little mango chutney, sweet and sour with a little bit of spice, so you get a balance. This is going to be salty, and I want you to
so this is done raw, the callaloo, yeah?
And then fried.
And just fried.
It's
so
blanched. It's blanched.
Oh, it is blanched first.
Yes, so that it allows it to be pliable. And did you taste a little bit of the sweetness and a little pepper of the mango?
I got more of the green and so on, and the mango.
Okay, so
but very.
Pull another piece.
KB. Very good though.
Yeah.
Now I got the mango.
Right, the sweetness that contrasts. Now we put a little bit. Traditionally, you put a little bit more, or you may even have a little bit of a chickpea. So you're gonna have an aloe or potato pie next with a little bit of a chana in it, so you get to see the difference. Okay.
Oh, that's excellent.
And this is called Sahina.
Sahina.
Yes. Okay. This one, by the time you finish, you're gonna get full. This is an aloe pie, which is basically a light dough that is fried with potato in it. And because we also have a lot of vegetarians, to make it a complete meal, the options are for you to put it with a little bit of a chana filling, and we also put a little bit of hot sauce to give you a little kick, and the sweetness to counterbalance a little bit of mango sauce.
So they kind of customize what you ask for.
Yes, you can have the basics, but then you can also make it a complete meal, something that's filling.
And the potatoes right in the dough?
In the base. No, it's actually
on the
filled
bottom.
in, but on the bottom. If you look right here, you see a little bit of potato.
That's really good too.
Yeah, nice and light. And
get a little spice.
Yes.
I don't know if that's a hot sauce. I guess that's the hot sauce.
So put a little bit of the hot sauce, and then you're going to get a little sweetness with the mango. So you're kind of getting a little bit of, a little bit of sweet sour.
This is a breakfast food,
or? This would be a breakfast or a mid-morning snack. You want something just before, and some people will probably have 2 or 3 of these, and for them, if you're not a heavy lunch person, with a nice cold beverage, and you're good to go. But it's a complete meal in the sense of having the protein if you're vegetarian. It's nice and hot. So
really nicely done.
And now we have another fritter. This is an eggplant based, or bagani. But eggplant based fritter. What she's put in it is just a little bit of hot sauce and a little bit of the sweet mango sauce, so you can get the real essence of the eggplant.
So they're filling this afterwards with the eggplant.
Yeah.
So it's
the eggplant is
in the fritter.
In the fritter, and then you add the various condiments and relish. So like any kind of sauce, any pepper sauce.
So it's the same dough that they're using for both base dough
for the fritters.
So one had potato, one had eggplant. And
Right, but this is a different.
That's a different. That's more of a.
More
That's
of a
more
lentil
liquid,
base.
right?
More of a lentil base, where this is more of a flour base.
Well, I see some in the back.
You see the
eggplant there?
Yeah.
Oh, I really like this one.
Yeah. Okay.